Battery anxiety has done something strange to the used electric car market. It's pushed genuinely excellent vehicles down to prices that make no sense once you actually check what the battery's doing, rather than just assuming the worst because the car is old and the word electric is attached to it. Here's what nobody tells you before you start looking. Most early electric cars in Britain were driven gently, charged overnight on a domestic socket, and babied by owners who paid a premium price and had every incentive to look after what they'd bought. That combination, gentle use plus anxious ownership, means the batteries in a huge number of these cars have barely been stressed at all. And because the wider public still associates any electric car older than about 5 years with a battery replacement bill, the prices have collapsed to levels that have almost nothing to do with actual condition. The Nissan Leaf, first generation, built from around 2011, is the car this entire conversation usually starts with, and for good reason. It was the first mass-produced electric car most people in Britain actually saw on the road, which means it's also carrying the most outdated reputation. Early battery degradation concerns were real on some examples, particularly ones that spent their lives in hot climates using rapid charging constantly, conditions that barely apply to British weather or typical usage patterns. A first-generation Leaf bought here, charged overnight, driven modestly, tends to retain far more range than the internet's collective memory suggests. I've seen these sell for genuinely absurd prices. £500 for a car that would have cost $30,000 new, purely because the seller assumed nobody wants a car with reduced range from a battery that's now over a decade old. What that price ignores entirely is that a huge proportion of daily driving in Britain is short journeys, school runs, supermarket trips, commutes under 20 miles, all of which a degraded Leaf battery handles without any issue whatsoever. Check the battery health display before buying. Ask for a state of health reading specifically, and you'll usually find it's holding up considerably better than the badge's reputation would suggest. The Renault Zoe, particularly the earlier generation before the range improvements of later years, suffers from a specific quirk that's actually worked in bargain hunters' favor for years. Renault originally sold these with the battery leased separately from the car itself, which meant the vehicle price alone looked artificially low. And used buyers unfamiliar with that arrangement often assume something's wrong when they see the number. Most of these lease arrangements have since been bought out or converted. But the confusion around ownership structure has genuinely depressed resale values on cars that are otherwise mechanically excellent. The motor and drivetrain on the Zoe are remarkably simple compared with a conventional petrol engine, fewer moving parts, less to wear out. And French buyers who understood this early have been quietly running these as second cars for a decade with minimal expense beyond tyres and brakes. If you find one where the battery ownership has already been resolved, either purchased outright or the original lease properly transferred, you're looking at one of the cheapest ways to own genuinely usable daily electric transport in the entire country. The Mitsubishi e-ME EV, along with its badge-engineered siblings, the Peugeot Ion and Citroën C0, all essentially identical vehicles sold under 3 different names, might be the single most overlooked electric car in British history. Built during a period when Mitsubishi, Peugeot and Citroën shared development costs on a genuinely capable small city car, these vehicles suffer from having no strong brand identity of their own, split across 3 badges that dilute recognition even further. I picked one of these up for a client 18 months ago, paid less than the cost of a decent second-hand bicycle, and it's been running daily errands around a small town ever since without a single issue. The limited range that made these impractical as a primary family car when new is almost irrelevant. If you're using it specifically for local journeys, which is exactly the use case where an electric car makes the most financial sense anyway. Nobody's chasing these at auction because nobody remembers which of the 3 badges to search for, and that confusion has kept prices on the floor for years. Quick pause before the second half of this list. If you want more of these breakdowns, actual numbers, actual battery health checks, none of the guesswork you get from most car channels, subscribe now. It genuinely helps the channel keep making these. The BMW i3, particularly the earlier examples with the range extender option, occupies a strange position in the used market because BMW's badge normally commands a premium. And yet this specific model gets treated with the same battery skepticism as far cheaper electric cars. The carbon fiber passenger cell underneath, genuinely advanced engineering, borrowed from BMW's motorsport division, means the i3 is lighter and more efficient than its badge and price would suggest, and the range extender variant specifically removes almost all the anxiety associated with pure electric range by carrying a small petrol generator as backup. These depreciated harder than almost any BMW in the company's history precisely because early adopters paid a serious premium for genuinely cutting-edge technology that the wider market wasn't ready to value once it reached the second-hand stage. That depreciation is now a buyer's opportunity rather than a warning sign. A well-maintained i3 with the range extender, bought for a fraction of its original price, delivers genuine BMW build quality and driving characteristics that most electric cars at this price point simply cannot match. The Volkswagen e-up, based on Volkswagen's smallest conventional city car platform, gets overlooked specifically because it looks almost identical to the petrol version it's based on, which means casual buyers scrolling through listings often don't even register that an electric variant exists at this price point. That visual anonymity, the exact opposite of a car trying to announce its own technology, has kept prices remarkably low for a genuinely well-built small electric vehicle from a manufacturer with serious engineering resources behind it. I've had these through with battery health readings that genuinely surprised me, given how cheaply they'd sold. Still comfortably handling daily commuting distances years after the original purchase. The simplicity of the platform, essentially a proven small car body with an electric drivetrain substituted in rather than engineered from scratch around the battery, seems to have paid off in exactly the kind of understated reliability that never makes headlines but consistently shows up in ownership experiences. The Kia Soul EV, an earlier electric variant of Kia's boxy small SUV, benefits from exactly the same conservative Korean engineering philosophy that's made the brand's conventional cars increasingly respected over the past decade, except almost nobody associates that reputation with the electric version specifically. The battery management system Kia developed for this generation was notably cautious, protecting the battery from the kind of aggressive charging and discharging cycles that accelerate degradation on less carefully engineered systems. Buyers searching specifically for electric cars tend to gravitate toward more recognizable names, leaving the Soul EV to sell for considerably less than its actual capability justifies. The distinctive styling that never quite caught on commercially when new has, ironically, become part of why these remain so cheap now, proving once again that whatever fails to sell a car when new often becomes exactly the reason it's a bargain a decade later. There's a pattern running through every single one of these 6 that's worth understanding properly before you go looking. Electric car batteries across every manufacturer on this list were engineered with far more conservative safety margins than public perception ever gave them credit for. Manufacturers knew that early battery failures would have been catastrophic for public confidence in the entire technology, and that knowledge translated directly into genuinely cautious engineering, protective charging algorithms, and battery management systems designed to prioritize longevity over outright performance. What actually separates a brilliant used electric car purchase from a genuine mistake isn't the badge, and it barely relates to the mileage in the way it would on a conventional petrol car. It's the battery health reading, checked properly, ideally through a dedicated diagnostic tool rather than just trusting the dashboard display. Combined with genuine charging history where available, a car that's spent its life on slow, overnight domestic charging will almost always outlast one that's been rapid charged constantly, regardless of which of these 6 badges happens to be on the bonnet. Every car on this list carries the exact same outdated fear, formed early in electric vehicle history and never properly updated, as real ownership data proved the technology considerably more durable than anyone initially assumed. That fear is currently worth thousands of pounds to whoever's patient enough to check the actual numbers rather than trust a reputation that stopped being accurate years ago. Next time you're scrolling through listings and an electric car catches your eye at a price that feels almost too low to make sense, it might be worth checking the battery health before you check anything else. The cars nobody trusts are often the ones that quietly prove themselves reliable years before anyone was paying close enough attention to notice.